guys, Frightener22 here, and welcome back to day 25 of my 31 Frightening Days of Halloween Marathon. Now, if you guys couldn't have guessed, I really didn't get all those slasher genre tendencies out of my system just yet. So tonight, we're going to take a look at 1990's Slumber Party Massacre III. Now, at the time of this release, which was 1990, this being the third entry in the Slumber Party Massacre franchise, it's all kind of starting to look pretty much the same plot-wise. The story centers on, it opens up on a group of teenagers that are playing volleyball on a desolate beach because apparently they found a beach where they're the only ones able to play at, which is so convenient. So they're playing volleyball, and then it becomes known that the main character, the main character, is alone because her parents have gone away, so she decides to have a slumber party with her girlfriends later that night. It isn't until at the slumber party that their boyfriends crash the party and a really vicious killer with a power drill is on the hunt for some teenage blood. So that pretty much is the plot in a nutshell. Now, the interesting thing to note on all three of these films is that every single one of these films in the Slumber Party Massacre franchise was written and directed by women. Now, I find this to be the most interesting thing about the entire franchise in comparison to any other slasher movie in the genre throughout the entire decade of the 80s, going into the early 90s. And that's interesting to note because at the time, especially when Slumber Party Massacre 1 debuted in 1982, at the height and the rise of the popularity of the slasher genre really brewing. This genre, specifically horror in particular, but the slasher genre, considering it was the most dominant in the 80s, was coming under a lot of fire by a lot of, women's groups as well as censorship groups, arguing that it just wasn't morally right. I mean, even reviewers such as Siskel and Ebert were going on their show talking about what trash and filth these films were, and just, how, what a terrible light, they put women in, and all these cliched things, treating women like trash and just as, sex victims, and, just to get mutilated in movies that just seem to be their only purpose. So I find it really interesting that in 1982, following into, 1987 with the sequel, going as far as to 1990 with Slumber Party Massacre 3, that all three of these films were, interestingly enough, written and directed by women. I mean, I think that just really goes to show that not all women were on the same wavelength as all these crazy people that were wishing to censor all slashers. And I think it's probably most interesting because all three of these women that actually directed each of these films, they kind of made, more chauvinistic slasher movies than more that come to mind. I mean, particularly these films probably put women in more of the most cliched and kind of dumb them down by making them look more like bimbos, making them, blonde, kind of clueless girls that are just, having a slumber party in their lingerie by drinking beer and, having, getting into sexual activities with boys, and then just being, torn to shreds by a power drill. And this was all conceived by women, which I find to be so damn interesting. It's just like, these women understood the genre and knew what it was. It was movie making. It was just fun. I mean, that's why it's just so ridiculous that these, censorship groups and women's groups were just, exhausting all their energy and time into talking about what filth these films are. It's movie making. It's supposed to be fun. It's escapism, So, I mean, that's definitely the biggest thing to note in this. So, like I said, I mean, Slumber Party Massacre 3, the main reason I chose to review it is just for the simple fact that this was the only sequel out of the franchise that I had not seen yet. So I figured it'd be a fitting time to review it for the sake of this marathon, since I just love any and all slasher picks for the most part. So, like I said, I mean, things, it's starting to look pretty much the same, and, there's just certain things in it that kind of, make it seem a little bit, even more chauvinistic. There's a particular scene when all the girls come over to the main character's house for a slumber party, and just one minor thing that I think is somewhat special and, almost charming in a sense that you don't really see anymore. It's just the simple fact that these girls were over and drinking beer and then getting, just getting doused up on junk food such as pizza and just, junk food in general. I just feel like you don't see that today. I just feel like girls today are so much more preoccupied and self-conscious about what they're eating, and, it just, it really kills the fun level of what it is to just hang out with your girlfriends, or your boyfriends for that, matter, and just kick back and kind of have fun, an old school style. I just think that, as silly and, just small and insignificant as that is, I think it's somewhat special because it just seems like you don't see things like that happen anymore. Everyone's so concerned about their their weight and what not to eat and what to eat and what have you. So I think it's things like that in these films that kind of make it a little bit more charming, if you will. Furthermore, there just is this scene when all the girls were over and they're rooting each other on to teach each other how to strip tease. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever met a group of girls that are willingly cheering themselves on and shouting and hollering at each other to, strip down to their bra and panties or even less. So I found that to be really interesting, and just another note as to, just how much, how just as chauvinistic these films appear to come off, but yet they're made by women who just truly understood that these films were just, sheer fun, and, horror movie lovers just ate this stuff up. Now, as far as the kills in this movie, I mean, it is really cool. I mean, the killer is, resorting back to, the classic power drill that he has in the first one. It's a different killer this time, but it's just, it's the same kind of idea. He's using a power drill. None of that, electric guitar power drill that many of you guys would remember from 1987's Slumber Party Massacre II. That's out. And, as cliche and, as formulaic as, it was getting, I have to say that they really, at least tried to add some kind of an interesting story. I mean, over the title sequence, you're just seeing a bunch of random pictures as the titles come up, and I wasn't really looking too deep into it because as, the movie trekked on and the plot was revealing itself more and more, I didn't really think too deep into it until, more or less the climax, when you realize that one of the boyfriends is actually the killer, and you learn that early on in the film, a retired police officer committed suicide, and you learn that the killer actually snapped because it seems like he was abused by his uncle, so that's kind of what caused him to snap. What caused him to snap to, off teenagers having a slumber party with a power drill? I don't know. It's a slasher pick. We love it for those reasons. It's totally cool. Now the cast just pretty much does what they have to do. I mean, granted, terrible acting, just, wretched, terrible, but it's just, these films these days are just, as more and more time goes on, I just feel like they're not the greatest of all movies, but they're fun, and they kind of are, carrying over and building that charm that, a lot of people have for, like, the 50s sci-fi B movies. I really think that a lot of these 80s slasher films are really coming into their own, and while not the greatest films, people just are having, horror fans in general, just particularly, me especially, just continue to have this, like, ongoing, appreciation and this charm factor that they have for these films, which I think is really great, because they are really solid. Now, like I said, the casting really isn't anything to note, although there's one guy in it, the main character's boyfriend, who just thinks he's so badass. He's just a Richard Grieco knockoff, but I just find it really funny, because he's such a tool in it that it's just, hard to believe that he's, like, the leading man kind of in this movie. But it's certainly not crucial viewing for the Halloween season, but I just certainly thought it was a fun slasher to check out. So if you guys are aching for something a little bit more fun, just really simple and effective, pop in Slumber Party Massacre 3 if you can find it. Mine's on bootleg because the whole DVD trilogy is currently out of print, but give it a whirl if you guys are interested. Thanks for tuning in to my 31 Frightening Days of Halloween Marathon, and I certainly will see you guys again tomorrow with yet another review. This is Frightener22.